Thank you for coming, everybody. This has been really fun to do some research on. And can everybody hear me? My voice doesn't carry very well. Can you hear me back there? Okay. This has been a really interesting subject for me because I've been interested in combining art and landscape architecture for a long time, and specifically placing art in either public gardens or parks or in my own garden even. And when Steve called, he's on the Festival of the Arts Committee, he called and asked me if I would do a presentation for the festival, and my first reaction was, no, 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 run away. But Steve can be really persuasive, and I said, okay. So I thought, well, maybe I'll take the opportunity to research this a little bit more and put something together for the festival. So, art in the garden. Turn off these lights if we want to get the full effect of the color here. Does anybody recognize where this was taken? Yes, 2010, I believe. Yeah. And I think Art Prize is when I started to really realize how important the settings are for art. And I thought this was just fabulous, the way they combined colors. You know, that orange is just a wonderful contrast against the green, and like little organic things jutting up out of the ground. It was just a perfect setting for that. So tonight what I'm going to talk about is just a little bit of history of garden design. Just echoing a little bit. Should I turn it off? Can you hear me if I don't have this on?
No.
Better to have it on.
You have it on? Okay. We're going to go to Brook Green Gardens and Longwood Gardens, two public gardens on the East Coast, and then closer to home, Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park and Ferris State University's Art Walk. And I'd like to show you a few slides of public art, which is used in placemaking, as landscape architects like to call it. And then lastly, we'll summarize it by talking about how to specifically add art to residential gardens. So this, honestly, the history won't take that long. Even though we're going back to the beginning of time, I'm going to do this quick. Garden design was really based, believe it or not, on the biblical description of the Garden of Eden. And it was described as a 4-parts garden. And it was divided by 4 rivers. And each quadrant of the garden represented a region of the earth, quadrant of the earth. And the Persians and in the Near East, they took that description and they interpreted it in their own gardens. And so they came up with what's called a 4-square garden, a very formal layout, as you can see. Everybody has seen this kind of garden. And these are those 4 quadrants, and in the middle is often a fountain, and the fountain represents the fountain of life. So this was brought to Europe by minstrels, traveling minstrels, and crusaders. And this type of garden was found in medieval castle gardens. And these castle gardens were walled gardens. They were considered pleasure gardens, often located outside of the castle walls. And this really, as I said here, sets the precedent for that formal, symmetrical garden design. And so as time went on, they started to embellish those plain little square gardens. And you can see these really intricate, beautiful designs, but you always can see how they came back, or they used that basic 4-parts garden as the basis of their designs. And then in the middle you have your fountain or statuary. So the Italians, the rich Italian villa gardens were adapted to that particular, that 4-parts garden style. But because of the topography in Italy being much hillier, what they did is they terraced it down these hillsides. So you still have that formal symmetry, but you have what's called bilateral symmetry. So you have equal halves going down this sight line here. And so these gardens were little outdoor rooms that terraced down the hillsides. But you still recognize those little, what they call parterres, those intricate designs, and they're quadranted off with evergreen hedges or something similar, or walls even.
Get a better view over there.
Here you can really see that sight line. And again, that's called bilateral symmetry. So it's two equal halves. And this type of garden, it almost dictates where the sculpture is going to go. You're not going to randomly put it somewhere in the middle of this garden. It's going to go right in the middle or here off in the corners. And if you have one, you're going to have another one because you got to have that balance. That's why you sometimes hear formal balance. And in the center, again, is often that sculpture. So you can see these sight lines are so important for locating the sculptures in a formal design. So then the French took it to another level. They saw what the Italians were doing, and they brought it back to France. And France is a lot flatter, so they could do more of that 4 parts garden and even more intricate designs in a much bigger scale. And I'm sure everyone has heard of Versailles. Well, that just kind of took it way over the top. And there was, a lot of competition among the royalty to do the bigger, the better, fancier gardens and to collect sculptures. And you can see here, it's like they had so many, they didn't quite know what to do with them all. They just lined them up. But the French, what they were trying to do was really conquer nature. They weren't working with nature. They were domineering over nature by creating this very geometrical, engineered type of garden design. And this type of garden even spread up to the north, to Holland. And if you've ever been to Holland, it's about as flat as pancakes. So they could roll these gardens out like carpeting. And you can see here, there's that typical 4 parts garden. And you can imagine that these are sculptural. They're not actually sculptures, but the plant material is used like sculpture. And they're located perfectly symmetrical. So if you have a formal garden, you almost know where you're going to put your sculptures. Now the English, on the other hand, they started out having these fancy formal gardens, but they started moving away from that. And maybe closer to the house, they had some formal gardens, but out towards, further out in the landscape, they started to develop what's called the Romantic style, the English landscape style. And it was working more with nature, and they were trying to achieve this really idyllic pastoral feel. And they often created man-made lakes just so they could put these beautiful little bridges over it. And what I found really interesting is they often incorporated these fake ruins. They would have they would have these little Grecian temples built, and to increase that perception of scale and space, like they're far off in the distance, and they would create them at like 3/4 scale, or sometimes even smaller. So it's a trick of the eye. So in this type of landscape, which is probably what we're most used to now, you have more opportunities for placing sculptures in more different types of environments. It's not dictated so much by the 4-square garden and symmetry and so forth. So now let's hop across the ocean to South Carolina. This is Brook Green Gardens. Has anyone been there? I know Carol has. It's a wonderful public garden. It's located just south of Myrtle Beach, and it was purchased by Archer and Anna Hyatt Huntington in 1930. They purchased Brook Green and 3 additional old rice plantations. So they owned a lot of property, and the purpose was to build their winter home, and also to show off Anna's sculptures. She's a sculptress. So they purchased in 1930, but by 1931, they had decided to open it up to the public. And this was the first American sculpture garden. So now they have grown the collection, and there's over 1,200 pieces of sculpture located in this garden. So Anna designed the original area for sculptures, and you can see it almost has that 4 parts garden layout, but she put a little twist on it, and it's actually in the shape of a butterfly. There's the wings, there's the body. But you can see how she has all these sight lines, just like in the formal gardens, so that she could place her sculptures for a really dramatic effect at the end of these sight lines. But with all these are actually our walks, all the gray areas. So these spaces in between are landscaped, and she's created wonderful little niches for sculptures. Some of this, by the way, this for instance is a newer building. She didn't have restrooms originally here. And there's more sculpture out beyond this original formal area. So I'm going to show you just a few pictures. This is a sculpture called Diana. And as you can see that sight line again, right? And this is bilateral symmetry. Each side is fairly equal. And if you notice right here and here are two small sculptures. And I wanted to point that out because they're small and they're in scale with that little space. They kind of fit that little space, and they're also in balance with each other. And this walkway, your eye is led right back to the fountain into this sculpture of Diana. And if you notice, she's way up high. So that vantage point really gives you the feeling that you're looking up at a goddess. It'd be totally different if she was down in the water and you're looking at her eye to eye like you're an equal. But by putting her up high, you get the feeling that she's otherworldly. They also used framing to really accentuate the views towards the sculptures. This Riders of the Dawn, is that what he's called? Yeah, Riders of the Dawn is out in the open, full sun, and they placed it there because it's a very energetic piece, very muscular. You can see all the muscles of the rider and of the horse, and in strong sunlight you really can see that contrast. You can see all the form that was put into that sculpture. So as opposed to putting it in the shade, I don't think it would be nearly as effective in the shade. So it's a large piece, it needs a large space, but they use this to their advantage to really frame the view. Here's another example of framing a view as well as the central sight line, putting it right at the end of this walkway. Your eye is led right to that little sculpture. And this is a less formal space. You don't have the clipped hedges or the wide sidewalk, but it's still very balanced. And the way the trees are maintained, you can see that it kind of forms an arch, and you have that same feeling of a frame around that piece. And this little piece is also in scale with its space. It's not too big. It's kind of a serene, a gentle type of piece. Gentle being, it's not, somebody that's riding off on a horse, but it kind of fits nestled in that little space. Now this picture I thought was really a beautiful example of contrast. You don't necessarily always have to have sculptures. This is a square pool, and they had 4 of these urns located at the 4 corners of the pool. And it was very balanced, and yet, the informal poppies here just really look beautiful with those rustic old urns. Just a really nice color combination, and those big urns kind of grounded the pool. Oops, I want to show you one more thing. In the background here, you see this wall? That's the brick wall that encloses the butterfly garden. So this brick wall they used to create that enclosure. Like the original formal gardens were enclosed by hedges, and they used this wall, and then periodically they had some vines that created sort of a solid part. And that's where they had, let me go back, that's where they had these engraved pieces of poetry. And I thought that was really kind of neat. It's like a whole other dimension. It's not just some passive art you're looking at, but a lot of it is really whimsical. I mean, how can you not